family to take the stand and make that case, Carol. So definitely a big thing for the prosecution.
Absolutely. We're expecting maybe Trayvon Martin's mother will take the stand and say, yes, that's my son's voice on that 911 recording. We'll just have to see. But as you said, George, Detective Serino expected soon on the stand. Once his testimony begins, of course, we'll take you back to Sanford Live. Joining me now for some perspective, though, from Sanford, CNN legal analyst Sunny Hostin, and here in Atlanta, criminal defense attorney Paige Pate and HLN contributor Jason Johnson. Welcome to you all once again. Sunny, I want to start with you, though, because you seem to be the only lawyer on the planet that said the prosecution scored some points with Detective Serino yesterday.
Really? Wow, I didn't realize that. I thought that there were some other people that agreed with me. Well, listen, bottom line is that this trial is by no means over. We are in the beginning of the second week of trial, only about 25 witnesses. And I think that the evidence that came in through Serino, which are the few statements that George Zimmerman made, were inconsistent where it was needed for the prosecution, and that is who was the first aggressor. He gave different stories as to why he got out of the car. Did he get out of the car to really find a street address when there are only 3 streets at the retreat at Twin Lakes where he is the neighborhood watch captain? Or did he get out to follow Trayvon Martin? He admitted finally on the tape that he was, while not following him, walking in the same direction. And so I think that really advanced the ball for the prosecution in terms of the first aggressor, in terms of who started this altercation. Now, the other thing, Carol, that I think is important to mention is, remember, the Sanford Police Department, this investigation was taken over by the state's attorney's office, and the Sanford Police Department didn't think there was enough evidence to charge George Zimmerman. So, of course, they believed his story, and that's what you got out of Chris Serino. I mean, I sensed in a way that we saw a little bit of pushback from the Sanford Police Department, from the investigators, because they believed that they were right when this prosecution believed they were wrong. So those are the dynamics that I saw in the courtroom yesterday. So perhaps, and because I'm in the courtroom, perhaps that's the reason why I'm the only lawyer that saw it that way, because I'm able to see it in real time.
Maybe so. Well, Paige, let me ask you this. Something that I thought the prosecution should have hammered home more. Detective Serino, for all that he said that was, quote, good about George Zimmerman, he wanted to charge George Zimmerman with manslaughter, and that, to me, was lost somehow yesterday.
Well, it was completely lost, but it's not common for a lawyer to be able to ask a detective or a cop or a law enforcement officer his opinion of the case. In other words, what did you think this individual should have been charged with? That's usually a question that they're not going to be able to ask. What is important, though, is to get out from the officer the things he did in response to Zimmerman's interview. He continued to investigate the case. He challenged him on a few points to show that even this officer, who seemed to be favorable to the defense, is not 100% behind George Zimmerman.
But, Jason, if you're Trayvon Martin's family and you're sitting in there, you know, in the gallery and you're watching, what's going through your mind?
Well, probably a lot of things. There were 2 key pieces of information yesterday. One, George Zimmerman coming out and saying, I hope this is videotaped. You don't say that if you think you did something wrong. But the other was this. You've got George Zimmerman saying, when he hears the 911 tape, that's not me. When he hears the screaming, he says, that's not me screaming for help. Well, if that's not you screaming and the screaming stopped once you shot.
Well, he didn't exactly. He said that doesn't sound like me. But if I'm screaming in fear, which I don't do very often, I might sound very different to myself.
And yet, right after that instance, I would think if his narrative is, look, I was screaming and screaming and screaming the whole time because I was terrified, I thought that was something the prosecution should focus on, because essentially it sounds like you shot somebody who was screaming for help. That would be the argument they should be trying to advance. So I thought there were bits of evidence for both sides.
Okay, so on that note, let's go back to yesterday and listen to Detective Serino's testimony about that from yesterday.
Investigator Serino, at about 52 minutes, when you're playing the recording, you specifically say, are you hearing yourself? And Mr. Zimmerman says, that doesn't even sound like me. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
The other discrepancy, I thought, Sonny, was George Zimmerman said when Trayvon Martin confronted him that night, he said, you have a problem with me? And George Zimmerman said, no, I don't have a problem. Now, I would wonder why George Zimmerman, as the neighborhood watch captain, would say, hey, I'm the neighborhood watch captain. What are you doing here? It's my job to check it out. Why didn't George Zimmerman do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something certainly that was addressed yesterday, and I think, Carol, you're dead on. I mean, that's the question everyone has. If you are the neighborhood watch guy and someone does say, you know, why are you following me? The response, you think, especially if you're armed, would be, listen, I'm the neighborhood watch captain. I've never seen you around this neighborhood. What are you doing around here? But rather, his response was, you know, I didn't want to confront him. I was fearful. I've got to tell you, I think practically the jury's always told not to leave your common sense at the door of the jury room. And so there are going to be those jurors that say, fear doesn't seem appropriate if you're getting out of your car to follow someone and you are armed. And so I think that's one of the points that the prosecution did score yesterday, because that was discussed between Detective Serino and George Zimmerman.
Of course, this entire case against George Zimmerman focuses on events at a gated neighborhood in Sanford, Florida. Let me take you through that.
It was here at the retreat at Twin Lakes, just a few blocks from the home Trayvon Martin was staying, where Zimmerman first spotted Martin, who was walking home